Hey, Mike.
What's up, Steve? How you doing, man?
Nothing. Thanks for joining me, Mike. For the 17 people that will eventually watch this is Mike Murray. And like we said, we are doing like a Q&A. So over the past week, I've asked people to give me questions on various nutrition topics for athletes, right? So I have some of my athletes asked, and so you're going to be on the spot. I'm going to throw questions at you.
All right, sounds good.
Um, Also, thank you for the Matt Minute series. People loved it, so it was really awesome. Got a lot of info out there, and I know it probably hurt you to break it down so tightly, and I know that there's probably a feeling in your stomach where you're like, but I need to get this information out. But we all appreciated it. It was very good. So let's get right to it, man. Um, so we have like a series of about 8 questions, and we're gonna split up half and half today, I think. So the number one and most common question I think I've ever received ever about nutrition, and I'm sure you get this too, is in some type of way, like when the kid's trying to gain weight, and I'm like, all right, dude, like, what are we doing? Like, how's your diet? Blah, blah, how's nutrition? And the kid always comes back and is like, yo, dude, I eat so much, but I can't get any bigger. I can't gain any weight. And like, obviously in my head, I'm like, ah, here we go. What do you say to that athlete that inevitably asks you that question? Because like, first off, is that the most common question you've ever had? And second, what do you say to that kid in all honesty? You can go off on it, you can do whatever. What do you say to that kid?
So, yeah, I would say this is the most common question I get. It drives me nuts because this is usually coming from someone who has no objective markers to demonstrate how much they're eating, right?
Right,
It's all relative. I feel like I'm eating so much. Well, how much are you eating? And they're like, well, what do you mean? I eat a ton. And I'm
right,
like,
right,
how
right.
many calories are you eating? Like, how much actual food are you eating? And they have no idea. Um, and, when it comes to this complaint of not being able to gain weight, I have zero sympathy for these people because personally, I'm a hard gainer through and through. And I can objectively tell people that in my off season as a bodybuilder, so I'm not a real athlete. My
Yeah, you're
my
you're an iron
activity
athlete, bro.
my activity levels are not as high as someone who plays basketball or football. As a former athlete, I can compare that, and I know that I'm not nearly as active. But for me, in my off season, as a 180-pound male who just lifts weights, I need to eat 4,500 calories per day to gain weight.
So now, just a disclaimer, that's a lot of food. That's a lot
Yeah.
of food. Like that, first of all, like what's the recommended daily value for the average human, which is impossible to put into a mold, is what, 2,000 calories, right?
Mhm.
That's what they
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a lot of weight, a lot of calories, dude. 4,500 calories is a lot. And I want people to get that in their heads. That's like a ton of food. Sure, go ahead.
Is a ton. And we've had many meals together.
Yeah.
You've seen, what I put down in a single meal and observed some very interesting things for me. I put down a lot of food because that's what I need to do for my goals, and it is what it is. So I think when it comes to these guys, it's really important for them to keep a food journal to understand how much they're actually eating and
Right.
to understand that value, because also we have to consider is not only do they not have an objective measure of how much they're truly eating, but when it comes to most people, and even athletes, they lack structure in their dietary patterns. So not only do we not know how much they're eating in general, but we also know that there's a very high probability that their intake is going to fluctuate a lot from day to
Sure.
day. And when you're not tracking, when you don't have nutrition targets, and you are a weight stable, lean, active human being, your body is going to adjust your hunger levels. It's going to adjust um, certain things which are going to impact how much you eat each day. So if you don't have any targets and you eat a lot one day, you're probably not going to be as hungry the next day, and you're going to eat a lot less.
Right.
You know what I mean? So you might feel like you're eating so much, uh, but that might only be 2 days a week where you're objectively eating a lot of food, and then on the other days you're eating a lot less because you're not as hungry, and ultimately that's why you are a weight stable human being,
Right. Yeah.
for 6 months at a time and not putting on any weight. So yeah, for these people, it's super important to, start tracking their food and get an idea of how much they're actually eating. And even without that hard data, like just generally think about how much food you eat, and then look at some of these super fun diets that professional athletes follow. Go look at what The Rock eats in a day.
It's
Go
a lot.
see what, the world's strongest man, Brian Shaw, eats in a day. I think a lot of people have heard a story about what Michael Phelps
Michael
eats.
Phelps, I was gonna say like 10,000 calories.
Uh-huh. And I'm not saying, anyone who asks this question needs to eat 10,000 calories, right? You're not going to do that. But, look at how much food some of these top tier athletes are eating and understand that you are a younger, growing athlete who's very active and needs to put on weight. And that, hey, you might not need to follow the same diet as these people, but you might need to follow a diet that has about half that amount of food in it. And
Sure.
can you objectively look at what you're doing now, look at the amount of food you eat on a daily basis, and say, yeah, it's about half that. It's
Yeah.
probably not.
Not even close.
Maybe one day per week when you go out with the guys and like crush some Chipotle or something,
Right.
but it's not on a consistent basis. And if it was, you wouldn't be weight stable for 6 months at a time and complaining how you don't gain any weight.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a big thing is like, the human mind, we tend to focus on like in other aspects like the negative, right? So like we
Mhm.
usually harp on the negative, forget about the positive. In this case, these guys, I think they focus on the days that they crush food, right? So like they're like, yo, I eat like crazy. Like you said, it might be 2 days out of the week, but to
Uh,
them, that's all they remember. That's all they see. And so even the parents that say it, because then the parents will be like, oh, he does. He eats me out of like whatever, And I'm like, I don't even know what that saying means, but I'm guessing it means that you think he eats a lot. But so all they see is those 2 days where he binges and crushes 4,500 calories, but then they automatically forget about the other 5 days of the week where they're getting 1,800 calories because, like you said, they're not hungry or
right.
they got stuff going on. So like we always tend to be like, oh yeah, dude, I eat this, and this. Well, you did like once a week, yeah,
Mhm.
you know.
That's an excellent point. And to kind of build off of that, and I don't mean to like put anyone down or to come at anyone with saying this, but in general, I want to say, like, you are not special.
Right, right,
And by that I mean, like, you need to consume more energy than you are expending on a daily basis to gain weight. Um, you are not unique in the fact that that principle does not apply to you. You might have to eat more food than someone else in order to gain weight, but at the end of the day, you need to eat more food
then you
that
use.
than you're expending,
Right.
right? Um, and that can be really difficult for a lot of guys, like me. You have to put the work in and day out, shoveling food down your pie hole when you're not exactly hungry in
Yeah,
order to, make meaningful changes to your body weight. Um, and, again, that requires a lot of hard work. So it's a lot easier to just say, well, I'm special and I can't gain weight.
right.
No, you're not,
Yeah,
right?
right.
The principle still applies to you. It just might take a little more work, but it's really easy to make the excuse and come up with all these unique reasons as to why, well, for me, it's just not possible to gain any weight, when it's really not the truth,
Right.
Because, because you're not keeping a log of how much you're eating. You're not, trying to push your intake higher every day. You're taking the easy road out by trying to make excuses rather than trying to be the best athlete you can be.
For sure. And I think that's a good point is like people don't realize it that it's work. It's hard work.
It is
And
hard
like you
work.
said, like it's not easy to do that. Like at times it can be uncomfortable too, right? Because like you're not used to eating that much, but you have to consistently force yourself. There's times that you're not going to want to eat, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're full,
Yep.
but you still have 800 calories to get to before the day's over. Well, hey, dude, suck it up, man. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's not like if it was easy, then there wouldn't be an issue. And, but it's just another part of being an athlete, whether you're a bodybuilder or a football player, that like it's that you have to work at, and it gets
Mm-hmm.
easier through time if you consistently do it and your body adjusts and you start making it changes. But you're gonna go through an uncomfortable period. And a lot of guys, in my opinion, and I'm sure 99% of coaches are gonna back me up on this. 99% of guys aren't willing to go through with that uncomfortable period.
Mm-hmm.
Just like in any aspect where you're trying to learn a skill or get better at something, or when training gets really tough. Like you can probably attest to in like your lead up to the shows and stuff. Training gets rough, eating gets rough, and like 99% of dudes are not willing to go through that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine, dude. You don't have to, but don't blame you not reaching your max potential on like, yeah, I just can't gain, for some reason I can't gain weight. Nah, dude, you didn't give your best. You didn't try. You didn't put in that effort to where you could. So don't blame it on whatever. That's on you.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big separator. I try to tell this to people. That's a big separator between dudes that make it and the dudes that don't, right? Because it's those dudes that make it are the ones willing to kind of put up with the BS and the grind in any facet of training, whether it's eating, like lifting, running, whatever. It's those dudes that have that little bit of intestinal fortitude, the guts to get through it and push through it and get through that uncomfortable stage so that they can realize that max potential. And that's why those dudes make it.
Yeah.
Because there's like I'm sure people say all the time, there's dudes that are just as talented as guys that are playing at certain levels, but they just don't make it. And what's the difference maker? And it's that little drive to get through. And it comes down to eating, dude, as crazy as it sounds.
Mm-hmm. I
You know?
mean, it's just like anything else. Your body ultimately wants to maintain homeostasis, a state of balance. And in order to drive meaningful adaptations in either direction is going to take a lot of hard work. For whatever reason, people clearly understand this when it comes to their training, right? They know that to get strong, to get big, they're going to have to lift some pretty scary weights. They're going to have to go through some pretty grueling sessions. But this concept of having a grueling meal, you know what I
Right.
mean? Where you would rather do anything else than finish the last half of your sandwich. Like these are the types of situations you have to endure when you want to make meaningful changes to your
For
body
sure.
weight. You know what I mean? I don't again, for some reason people think it should be easy to put on weight and for a lot of our country it
Right.
is,
Right.
but for a very active athlete, not so much, you know what I mean? And people need to understand that it's a difficult process and it takes a lot of hard work.
I think that you touch a good point. Like I think it was like 38%
Yeah.
of our country is obese.
And we have some statistical models showing, how things are going to look in like the next 5 years or so, and it's supposed to get much worse.
Really? So
Yeah,
like, so 38%, I think that was the number. So
roughly. Yeah.
people like the kids look at this, right? And the kids look at that number and they're like, dude, like they can do it. And, but I try to point out like that's not your population, dude. Like
Exactly. Yeah.
those people that have a problem with that are usually not as active. They're also usually, not athletes. They're usually older and more sedentary. Like there are people that become like my age is getting affected by it, right? So like it's starting to be like bad. And why? Because we're less active. Because one, we're older. Two, we're stuck at jobs.
Hmm.
Three, we're just the grind of being on the hamster wheel, right? So going to work, coming back, and it's all cycle. And that's when we get lost. We lose the motivation to be active. These kids that we're dealing with right now aren't that. They're the exact opposite of that. They're growing. So their metabolism's through the roof as is. Two, they're active. They're running around all day. They're training. They're doing this and that. You are not the same population as those people that are suffering from that, right? So it is going to be a whole different ballgame. You're actually going to have to go out and make a concerted effort to gain weight instead of, so just don't consider your situation so much different. Like, oh, why can't I do that? Well, you're not the same person. It's crazy.
Exactly.
Rant done. My bad. I got a little. Yeah. So this one's kind of like a bodybuilder bro type John.
All right.
A lot of people, multiple people asked, hey, how quickly should I get a protein shake after my workout? And so like, I'm obviously going to let you handle this one, but, maybe you could get into, post workout shakes, and also like the anabolic window, or even touch upon muscle protein synthesis, if you may, just because like obviously a lot of guys in here, a lot of girls too, bigger, stronger, and they want to maximize, and all these ads and all these supplement companies and all this and that, and the bros and stuff, they're like, all right, you got to get it in within like 30 minutes of your workout, all that stuff. Can you just debunk some myths? Can we just give us the real life shot of what we should do post workout, and talk about the anabolic window and such?
Yeah, so the anabolic window is kind of a concept that's been more or less dismantled in recent years. To quote a paper from a couple of scientists, Brad Schoenfeld and Alan Aragon, who did some work on this, it's more of an anabolic barn door. Basically, there's a much bigger opportunity than many think. So there's nothing inherently special about immediately slamming a protein shake post-workout. Rather than focusing on these really narrow peri-workout windows for nutrition, and we'll talk about some times that may be important for athletes, but in general for optimizing recovery, and for building muscle, you should be more focused on your total daily intake of protein throughout the day, and getting a sufficient amount. Now, with that being said, the most practical way to hit this relatively high total protein intake is to have multiple protein-rich feedings per day, evenly spaced out over the course of the day. So about 4 feedings on average. And with those 4 feedings, there's post-workout is probably a good window compared to when you last had your protein feeding, right? So, if you're spacing out over the course of the day, that's probably having a 20 to 40 gram bolus of protein every 4 hours. One of those right. intervals may very well be post-workout.
Right.
But does it have to be immediately after your workout? No. You can take your 30-minute drive home from the gym, take 30 minutes to cook a meal if you want, instead of having a protein shake, and then have your bolus of protein, and it's not going to make any difference in terms of the overall outcome as long as you're hitting your total daily protein intake. So I guess that's another thing. There's nothing inherently special about whey protein post-workout either. It's just a complete protein source, so it contains all 9 essential amino acids, or amino acids that you must get through your diet because your body does not make them. Other animal protein sources contain the same thing and are equally efficient sources. So like poultry, beef, eggs, other dairy products besides whey. So yeah, it doesn't really make a difference. But with that being said, is there any negative to having a protein shake as soon as you're done your workout? No, have one.
Yeah.
Slam one as soon as you're done your last set of bench press. There's no negative to doing it, but it just more or less like, hey, I want to ease your concern about, oh man, I forgot my shaker
Right.
at home. I have to drive home now. I'm
I
going to
gotta
get
stop
my
at
protein.
GNC.
Yeah, I'm going to have to stop somewhere and get some protein because if I wait 45 minutes, I just lost all my gains,
All gains gone.
or my recovery is going to be completely compromised for my session tomorrow. Uh, it's not a concern. You could, wait multiple hours
Yeah.
after your workout, 2 hours if you wanted, like whatever best fit your schedule, just as long as you're having multiple protein feedings throughout the day and hitting that total daily intake of at least 1.6 grams per kg of body weight.
Thank you. So to piggyback off that, right? Keeping it with protein. A couple guys asked protein powder or food. Now I know there's like variables and stuff, but in a
Mm-hmm.
vacuum, right? Looking
Mm-hmm.
at this in a vacuum, what would you prefer an athlete choose to have a whole food source or a protein powder? And also, is there differences in terms of delivery and absorption into the body and stuff like that?
So this my answer is why not both, right? We can definitely have both. Um, so whey is a fast digesting source. Um, so basically, as soon as you consume it, it's going to be rapidly absorbed and into the bloodstream. And this tends to coincide with a rise in muscle protein synthesis and a sustainment of muscle protein synthesis for, on average, like 2 to 3 hours. Um, and in comparison to uh, a whole food source, due to it possessing other nutrients in it.
Right.
Especially when it comes to these animal sources, there's likely a bit of fat in it. There's also some micronutrients in there that we have to consider as well, which aren't in a whey protein source. And this can uh, basically result in a slower absorption. And the slower absorption seems to coincide with a more sustained rise in MPS. So I was just talking with one of my athletes about this yesterday. So there's a really interesting study showing that like 20 grams of protein from a lean steak, so think something like chuck. So there's probably like for 20 grams of protein, like 5 to 7 grams of fat.
Oh,
Showed
the five stuff gross. You just broke that like a random piece of meat down. All right. That's impressive.
showed a elevation in MPS that was sustained for around 6 hours, um, which is pretty darn long, right?
Yeah, it's great.
Um, so from a practical perspective, if you were just consuming whey protein, it would probably be more beneficial to have more frequent protein boluses than
Hmm.
compared if your meals of protein were something like, eggs and steak
Right.
and then chicken or something. Um, you know, Whereas if it was just whey, it would probably make more sense to have like 5 protein boluses per day, where if you're eating whole foods for your meals, you could probably get away with like three, right? But again, as long as total daily intake is
Is met.
sufficient,
Right.
that's what matters. But, just to provide some like very technical nuances about how the protein source you're selecting can affect
For sure.
MPS and how that could potentially affect how many times per day that you should consume protein. Does that kind of cover that, or anything
Yeah.
I didn't touch
No,
on?
yeah, for sure. And my next point would be like in terms of protein powder versus food. Now, if you are an athlete that's looking to lose weight,
Mm-hmm.
um, and so you're on a calorie restriction, like a caloric deficit,
Mm-hmm.
and you're like, dude, I can only eat, I don't know, 2,000 calories. And so you're gonna feel that, dude. You know what I mean? Like, so like losing weight's just as hard and mentally challenging as gaining weight for people, right? So like you have to deal with the hunger pains and stuff like that, and like knowing that you can't eat as much as you normally would, and knowing that like just because you're hungry you can't eat. So in that case, in ISU, is it better to have the whole food source um, or the protein powder in terms of like holding you over?
So, just in general, in terms of like body composition goals, so you're referring to weight loss. I'll touch on weight gain here as well. For weight loss, it's always going to be more advantageous to consume your protein from whole food sources, uh, as opposed to whey. And I mean that whey in terms of just like as a shake, as a liquid, because
Hmm.
you could throw whey in like your oatmeal or
Right.
like a Greek yogurt or something, and that would result in superior satiety or a feeling of fullness as compared to just drinking it as a liquid.
For sure.
Um, but yeah, a whole food source, something that you have to chew and it takes some time to get down, is always going to result in improved fullness following the consumption of that protein as opposed to a liquid. And then, on the other extreme, if you're looking to gain some weight, protein, particularly from whole food sources, is one of the most satiating things you can eat. It can have like the most impact on your fullness. And if you're trying to gain weight, and you're consuming a lot of protein, maybe if you're a particularly large individual and you have a lot of protein to eat, they might not be able to meet their protein needs just through whole foods.
Right.
It simply makes them too full, and they can't get it down. So for these guys, it makes a lot of sense to consume, at least one protein shake per day. What a lot of people, if they're having 4 protein feedings per day and they're struggling to meet their needs, I'll have 2 protein shakes in there per day, just because it has little impact on satiety and it makes it easier to meet their protein and overall calorie needs. It's always going to be less satiating to get your calories from liquids as opposed to whole foods.
Yeah, thank you. You said that way smarter than me, but that's what I was getting at. That's what I was getting at. And to just to piggyback off that last thing about protein for right now, we talked that's a very popular topic of conversation, I guess, with teenage dude athletes. What is, in your opinion, what are some good sources of protein that you don't necessarily have at a meal, like non-animal? I guess he's trying to go vegan or vegetarian or something. What's the best source of protein that you can get, like snacks, that aren't meat?
So I don't. This question is oddly phrased. I don't know. Do you
Yeah,
want
I'll have to talk to him about it.
do you want me to dive into like the whole vegan vegetarian thing, or
No,
just?
I was just making fun of him. I
Oh,
don't think
okay.
he's gonna be
So then
vegan or vegetarian.
I'll
I
in,
think what he was looking for is um
I'll
just
interpret this
options.
question then. I'll interpret this question as convenient protein sources. Protein sources that you don't have to like actually like cook up and like
Prepare.
prepare for a
Yeah,
meal. So
perfect.
convenient protein
Makes
sources
sense.
which correlates a lot to snacks, I guess you could say. But yeah, I'll stick to convenient. So what immediately comes to mind is Greek yogurt.
Yeah.
Um, a similar option, but tends to be less palatable or just
Cottage
less.
cheese. Don't say it. Don't say it. I got like a thing for texture. That's nasty, yo.
So cottage cheese, but yeah, usually Greek yogurt because people like Greek yogurt. There's all kinds of different flavors. I mean, it's a great.
It took me a while to like Greek yogurt. I had an ex-girlfriend that like forced me to eat it. And I was like, nah, I don't like it. I don't want it. I don't want it. And then I ended up liking it. So I tried it with cottage cheese too, and I want to vomit. So
Dude, there's just so many flavors of Greek yogurt. I feel like it's hard to just not like it overall.
I know, but it's a texture thing, Mike. It's a texture thing.
Mm. So yeah, cottage cheese. Yeah, I think they have some flavored stuff. I mean, some of them
They
come
do.
with
They have like the mix
fruit.
with like the fruit and the cottage cheese, and you mix it. It's still gross.
So
Doesn't
yeah,
change.
those are two good ones. Sticking with dairy, milk is a great source of protein. Kind of, again, I mentioned earlier how a protein-rich feeding is probably at least 20 grams, but I would say that's for like a smaller individual, maybe
Right.
maybe
Up to
a
like
female in most cases.
up to 40, you
Um,
would say, right?
yeah, so it can be kind of hard to meet that 20-gram threshold through milk. It's a lot of milk, and then you have to consider like the additional calories from
Calories.
carbohydrate and fat if you're drinking like whole milk that come with that. So it's not always the best source, but it is still a really high quality source of protein that's convenient. But that's just something to consider. You can kind of throw cheese sticks in there as well.
Love cheese.
Same issue though. Probably like a reduced fat option, unless like you're trying to gain weight.
Right.
Um, then you could utilize a whole fat option. But yeah, that's another high quality source. Other thing that's come to mind are protein bars, whey protein shakes, convenient options that you don't have to prepare. Beef jerky is a really good one.
Love it.
Uh, some people don't commonly suggest that. I don't know, probably because of the high sodium
Salt.
content, but that's absolutely ridiculous because, hey, unless you're like a 45-year-old pre-hypertensive subject with,
We're good.
a family history, it's not something you should worry about. Definitely not if you're, a 17-year-old who is very active. Sodium is the primary electrolyte loss in sweat, as we went over in the presentation.
Indeed.
Um, so yeah, not something to worry about. Something that you definitely need adequate amounts of and shouldn't be avoiding as an athlete. That mostly covers it. Hard-boiled eggs is another one. Make those in advance. Have them sitting around. Easy, convenient snack. Not nuts.
Why
Stop
not?
with that. Nut, nuts are not a complete source of protein, and when you look at the amount of calories that nuts
Right.
provide, it's it's a lot. Why? Because they're a primary source of fat.
Right.
And
Exactly.
fat is the most energy dense macronutrient. So not only is it not a high quality protein source, it does not provide all the essential amino acids that we need to build skeletal muscle. It comes with a bunch of calories from because it's a rich source of fat. And don't get me wrong, it's a great source of fat, and
Right.
very healthful fats which have beneficial effects on your general health, and you need those. But when you're going for protein, nuts are a horrible choice.
Right. Right. Yeah, and that's what I wanted to talk about too, about like with dairy and stuff, right? Like you said, cheese.
Mm,
Yeah, there's protein in that, but you can't ignore the rest of the macronutrients in it,
mm,
right? So like especially people that are on weight management, athletes that are on weight management. Like if you're trying to gain weight, yeah, it becomes less of an issue because you're looking for excess calories somewhere,
yes.
right? So like I get that, but for the athletes that are trying to lose weight and get to a target goal that's less than what they have, they have to be careful when they start going off into protein sources that aren't meat, right? So like you said, cheese, nuts, those, because you said, there's more calories in a gram of fat. There's 9 calories,
Hmm.
per gram of fat, whatever. So like people don't realize that shit adds up. It builds up.
Hmm.
And so like, and also like I'm a big like seed guy, right? I'm a big sunflower seed guy, baseball, right? And I also like peanuts and stuff. Like you don't realize how much you actually eat, right? Because it's like a picking thing. Like there's like you take them out of a bag, you throw them in there, and what you don't realize is you check the back in the serving size, and you're like, yo, I just smoked the serving size. Like I just went way beyond that. Like there's so much like misconception is like, oh, let me just like throw this like sleeve of peanuts down or something like that.
Hmm.
Well, realize what you're getting into because it's going to be way more calorically dense than say some other snack choice, and you don't even realize it. And what you just did, you just blew past your calorie restriction for the day. So I
Yeah.
mean, like that's a really big point that you bring up.
Yeah, in general, you can kind of split this into, if you're trying to gain weight and you're looking for convenient sources of protein, full fat dairy. You know,
Right.
if you're weight management, stick to reduced fat or non-fat products. And then also for weight management, beef jerky is a really good source
Best
because it's
option.
super lean.
Yeah.
Same goes for a whey protein shake. You have to be careful with protein bars. You have to look at the calories. Some are absolutely loaded and are
Yep.
perfect for guys trying to gain weight. In the range of like 350 to 400 calories. But if you
Uh,
go to Wawa, like the metrics
the big
bars,
100s. I was about to say, dude, they got all right. I better get some money from metrics right now though. Dude, the big 100 bars, right? Like they're like thick Johns. They got like
yeah.
30 grams of protein, but it's 400 plus calories depending on which one you get.
Hmm.
All right, so like I got I'm a big apple guy. They have this baked apple pie one that it's got like the apple goo on top and it's got like the frosting on the. It is so good. Like go out and get it. So freaking good, dude.
And then also the Gatorade protein
Yeah.
bars are loaded in calories. Those are
Right.
like 350. And what else comes to mind? Like they're by Chef Robert Irvine. He has like a
Oh,
brand of protein bars. Those
the
are loaded.
the ones in the yellow package, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
his face
Yeah.
is on it or whatever. Yeah, yeah.
And then if you're weight management, look for things like Quest, Oh Yeah One Bars, Muscle Farm. These are all things that tend to be around like 200 calories and
Yeah.
provide 20 grams.
Muscle Farm has one that is like a cinnamon
Yeah.
twist. That John is fire. That John is fire. Now, a quick touch on that though, like be careful. You might get some GI issues with some of those though, like with some of the bars, right? Am I like
Well,
punching out of my league here because of
maybe
the
for you at your age and
damn? It's
your
like that,
genetics,
dude.
but
It's
I
like
mean,
that.
most of most of the people that are listening to this and who this applies to, I mean, you so due to like the sugar
Sugar
alcohols
out. That's what I was
and
trying to get out before you came at me. Damn.
yeah, they can potentially cause some GI distress in some individuals, but for the healthy, 18-year-old, I would highly doubt it. You know what I mean? It's kind of like
Yeah,
being like
yeah.
lactose intolerant.
Right, exactly.
It's the same principle. Like, is it happen? Yeah, but like, it's not more common than it is not. You
Right,
know what
right.
I mean?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, it's just yeah, that's why. Yeah, 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 yeah. I'm getting up there in age. I get it. Like, whatevs. It's cool. I've accepted it. I'm getting older. All right, last question for the day. We're gonna get away from protein a little bit. So when should an athlete prioritize consuming a simple or refined carb versus like complex carbs? I know we talked about this in the MAP minutes. If you guys haven't seen it, I would go check it out on my Instagram and on my Facebook. Mike did an awesome job this past week breaking it down. But I wanted to just dive into it a little bit because we didn't really get to touch upon when an athlete would have one or the other. We talked about like where we can get each, but I know we were just talking about meal timing and how like cool that is and how we're getting into it and how a lot of stuff's coming out. So I wanted to touch upon it here. Does it make a difference? Like, does the type of carbohydrate source? Oh God, does the type of carbohydrate source make a difference? And if it does, when should we get either or?
Yeah, so if you go and watch the Map Minute, and then also if you have access to the the competition nutrition
Mhm.
PowerPoint and kind of combine the two, it more or less answers this question. But I'll kind of bring these together here, and then maybe touch on some stuff that wasn't included in those. But when it comes to simple carbs as opposed to complex carbs, it can matter in terms of the athlete, in regards to what source you're picking in relation to the timing of your competition or practice. So it's generally recommended to consume carbohydrate before training, and it's also generally recommended that this be a high glycemic source or a refined simple carbohydrate. And basically, the reason for this is simply because you're less prone to any gastrointestinal distress. So things like just bloating or gas, which may have a negative effect on your performance. So we want to stick to refined sources there for the most part, but with the caveat that if you have a competition, it depends on what kind of athlete you are. But if you have an extended duration competition, so something, think like soccer, maybe, where 2 hours, intermittent anaerobic activity, you're moving a lot. Um, you know, if you have a halftime, that gives you an opportunity to have some more carbs at half, But if it's practice, you might not have like a really long break to get more
Right.
food in. And in that situation where you know you have a long bout of performance coming up, it may make sense to prioritize some complex carbohydrates in your pre-practice meal, because they are absorbed slower, and there's a more slow and sustained rise in blood glucose. So you're less likely to feel like you're kind of like bottoming out in the middle of your training bout. Does that make sense what I'm getting at with that point?
Right. And so you kind of explained it, but I wanted to see if you could explain blood glucose, right? Like some people get it, but you know, a lot of kids that we're dealing with have no idea what that means, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, what is it and why is it important to have a good handle on your blood glucose levels?
Yeah, so the reason for this is that if it gets too low, which is kind of more or less what we're concerned with here with athletes,
Right.
we don't want it to get too low, when it comes to, performance, because this results in things like you could get dizzy, you could be shaky. Basically, when your blood glucose levels are not in a good place, it can negatively affect your performance. And this can result from, inadequate overall consumption of carbohydrates throughout the day, or maybe if you consumed uh, your carbohydrate meal before training or competition too far before the competition. Um, and these are things to consider, timing and the source and the duration of your activity, because if these things aren't properly planned for, this could result in, a hypoglycemic episode, or your blood sugar is going to drop because there's inadequate access to carbohydrate, or perhaps you didn't top off your glycogen stores before the event, so your stores of carbohydrate are inadequate as well. Basically, there's just not enough carbohydrate there, resulting in a drop in blood glucose. You get shaky, maybe dizzy, and it negatively affects your performance.
Right. And so they say Alan Aragon just came out on IJ, speaking of him, and talked about how like carbohydrates are considered like the one non-essential macronutrient, right? You don't need it to survive. And
Yes.
he was like, yeah, if you look at it like that, sure. But if you're an athlete and you're looking to have an elevated level of performance, try going without carbs and see how, you know, how they're not essential, right? Because carbohydrates are a huge player in sports performance, right? Like you were talking about, you know, coordination and sustained energy levels and rate of perceived exhaustion. You know what I'm saying? So like the effort levels, it's hard to sustain without the right amount of carbs, and that gets to the blood glucose levels, right?
Yeah, and on that point, kind of unrelated, there's some like interesting data in regards to like ultra endurance events, and potentially like the benefits of
Craziest people alive.
being on like a very low carbohydrate diet, and how ketosis for those specific circumstances could benefit performance. But in general, if you are, in a traditional sport, which is anaerobic in nature, or has intermittent bouts of high intensity, such as like in baseball, football, soccer, eat your carbs.
Yeah, I don't deal with many like ultra marathoners and stuff like that. You know, I'm crazy, but not like that kind of crazy. That's like those dudes are insane, bro. Insane.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that like that's a big deal. Like that's a big deal, right? Like the timing of it, making sure that you're properly getting it in. Like, so what's like the normal window that like an athlete should try to consume a carb heavy source? Like in terms of say I got a competition, a game at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. When should my meal be? And what should that meal look like? Should it be like protein? Should it be like your regular like balanced meal, or like what should that look like?
Yeah, so this kind of gets into the PowerPoint.
The
So when
PowerPoint, right?
we're talking pre-competition, we're looking at having some sort of primarily carbohydrate feeding 1 to 4 hours beforehand. Uh, how long in advance you select should be based on individual experimentation, what works best for you, what makes you feel the best. So some people like, eating an hour before. They like feeling a little bit empty coming into that competition. Sorry, they like feeling full coming into that competition. It makes them feel good psychologically. It puts them in a good place. Other people really want to have, they like to feel a little bit empty. They want to avoid any potential bloating. They just feel slow if they, you know, for a
Right.
lack of like a better term.
Right. Sluggishness out there.
Yeah, they feel slow and sluggish after their meal. They don't want to eat too close to competition. So for them, having their meal 3 to 4 hours out makes more sense. The longer before competition, the more food you want to eat. So we're looking at per hour about a gram of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. So if you're 1 hour out from competition, you have your meal, you should probably consume about a gram of carbohydrate per kilogram. If you're 4 hours out, it should be about 4 grams per kilogram of body weight, which is a lot of food. And those aren't hard and fast rules. Again, you can adjust that size based off of what works best for you. But those are some general recommendations. And then that meal should typically be, like I said, a high GI carb. It should be lower in fat and lower in protein. And for the same reasons that it should be a high GI carb, it's just keeping protein and fat lower tends to result in less potential gastrointestinal distress, which could negatively affect performance. But these are general recommendations. If you find that having a little more fat, like a moderate fat meal, tends to make you perform better, you like that more, go for it. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
absolutely. I think part of this is like trial and error, right? So
Yeah.
like,
Hmm.
but the big thing is like you got to be objective,
Right.
right? It's like you have to look at if there's a way to like look at data
Hmm.
that like unfortunately there's in some instances there's none, right? There's none like
Hmm.
like bat speed. There's not a lot of times where I can check bat speed out for because we just don't have that technology at the amateur level like that. Um, but we have to base these findings objectively, and it's hard to do that because you're involved, right? So like like a person is involved in the situation, so they're not going to be the best at keeping things objective because they want to be they want to look at it in the best light. Or some people like me, like you're really hard on yourself, so you're like, oh, I sucked, but you may have had actually a decent day. So it's really important to be honest with you in that evaluation during the trial and error period, because that's going to be what's going to give you the best formula moving forward.
Yeah, I think for a topic like this, it's not the worst thing to just be like, hey, what makes
How do
you feel the
you feel?
best?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Especially when it comes to, you know, maybe something like the gym, it's a little bit easier. Like if you have squats week 1 and then
For
squats
sure.
week 2, and then like, you change your carbohydrate amount in this meal and you eat it X amount of hours before, like, was my squat performance better? Did I feel better in my squat or this and that? But, and I guess you can do the same thing for competition performance, right? But I think just a good metric with all this is just like how do you feel? Again, you have a meal 1 hour before. How did you feel? Well, I felt sluggish and kind of slow, and I felt tired, after my meal. And it's just like, okay, well, 1 hour before doesn't work for you. How did you feel 3 hours before? I felt ready to go. I felt like, my stomach was in a good place. And then kind of related, but kind of like off topic with where I was going with that. If you're someone who tends to get like pretty nervous before competition and like
Right.
shaky,
Yeah.
um, that can affect what you consume and how far in advance you consume it. So like you might not even tolerate like whole food prior to your competition just because you're so like revved up and shaky,
Amped
and you
up.
might benefit more so from like a liquid carbohydrate supplement like a Gatorade or something as opposed to having a whole
For sure.
meal. um, that's something to consider there. So that kind of covers pre.
Yep.
But in regards to post, um, in post, uh, a simpler refined carbohydrate makes more sense as well. It especially makes sense if you have like a tournament or you have 2 training sessions in one day where kind of need to rapidly replenish your
Bounce back quick.
carbohydrate stores. Yeah. So in that case, you definitely want to have some simple refined carbohydrates. If your next like training bout or competition is in like 24 hours, it doesn't really make a big deal. Just make sure you're getting in enough carbs throughout the day. But it's definitely important to preferentially consume high GI if you need to perform again within 8 hours. I kind of, yeah.
Yeah,
Any,
so for all the like baseball right now, and basketball too, AAU and soccer, so basically all sports, everything right now, amateur, the youth level is these major tournaments, right? You drive, a common one in this area is Diamond Nation, and you go and you might play 7 games if your team's good. None of my teams that I coached ever played 7 games in a weekend, but we put these kids on the field 7 times over the course of 2 days, right? So they might play 2 games on a Saturday, then they play 2 games on Sunday morning. They do well. They're there for 3 more games in the afternoon. So the carb choice is really important there, right? And your meal choice is really important there. Now, my suggestion is that we pack ahead of time and we plan, but like we want to make sure that we get those simple refined carbs so that we can keep replenishing those stores, right? Because if not, you are going to be in a world of trouble towards the end. And so like I think that's something that we need to do a better job of in terms of parents and players, is just preparing and planning for those repeated bouts of exercise and competition and making decisions based off of that. Unfortunately, because it doesn't look like that's going to change. I mean, as kind of terrible as forcing 7 games on kids is in a 2-day period, a 3-day period, and as detrimental that is to the kid's health probably and in the long-term athletic development, unfortunately, that's where the money is right now, and that's going to drive what we're going to do until we start to like smarten up a little bit. So like with that being the case, we have to start preparing for those possibilities.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So when it comes to athletes around competition, makes sense to prioritize high GI. But for basically every other meal in the day, or if you're on an off day, it still does matter your source of carbohydrate. And I would like to see a higher proportion of carbohydrates consumed from complex sources, as opposed to refined sources. My typical recommendation is to have, at least half of your grains be whole grains, right? So, your whole grain, multigrain, whole wheat breads and pastas, oatmeal, brown rices compared to white sources. And the reason for this is simply because these sources contain fiber. Fiber has a variety of positive impacts on health. It nourishes your gut microbiome, which is linked to all kinds of different diseases, is linked to your immune health, even your psychology.
Brain
Basically,
health.
you wanna nourish these bacteria in your gut, and they are primarily nourished through fermentable carbohydrates, and fiber. So all kinds of positive effects there. Also, whole grains tend to be rich in vitamins and minerals, which may or may not be in refined carbohydrates. Some of them, so these vitamins and minerals get removed in the processing of simple carbohydrates, but sometimes they get put back in the end. So it kind of depends on what exactly you're consuming. But in general, whole grains are going to be richer in a diverse array of vitamins and minerals, which is super important. Um, and then fiber plays a significant role in satiety. So if you're a weight management athlete, it makes sense to consume more whole grains rich in fiber, because it's going to keep you a little bit fuller throughout the day. Besides that, oh, okay. Besides that, particularly when it comes to your athletes, Mel,
Uh-uh. Uh,
uh, a great reason to prioritize complex carbohydrates is because your guys don't tend to eat many fruits and vegetables, which are also
Man, you guys
which
rub
are
me under the
also
bus
great
like
sources
that.
of
I'm
fiber.
trying to be a role model for the people, and now it comes out that I'm not doing a good job. Thanks, guys.
So, if you don't eat these things, um, you probably have a very low intake of fiber. And as we just discussed, fiber has numerous benefits. You want to make sure you're getting in enough fiber per day. And if you're not eating fruits and vegetables and you're not eating whole grains, you're going to have a very low fiber diet. Um, so, you know, I find that with a lot of guys, to get their fiber intake in, if they're really fighting me, especially on the vegetables, they may be more willing to swap out their white bread for a piece of whole grain. They're like, yeah, that's fine. Like, I'll just eat that instead. As opposed, but they'll be like, I'm not adding in broccoli
Yeah. Oh
in
my
my
God.
in my
If it's
meal.
green, I'm not eating it.
Conversely, if you eat a good diet, a healthful diet, and you eat lots of fruits and vegetables, you have a high fiber intake, you're consuming a wide variety of micronutrients, then it probably doesn't matter as much if you're, consuming white rice as opposed to brown and you prefer white bread because you're meeting your other nutrient needs. But for someone who doesn't consume as rich of a diet, it may make even more sense to consume more whole grains, even more than the half of your grain servings per day recommendation that I typically give.
Yeah. So piggybacking off that before we wrap up. So like when people get into these or work with people and talk about like macros and stuff, um, it's always okay, calories, protein, carbs, fats, right? And so you bring up a really good point, and this is why I appreciate you and your work. Like there's other things other than the macros that have an effect on humans in terms of just living and function and also like athletic performance, right? And you touched upon it, the vitamins, minerals, the micronutrients,
Mm-hmm.
right? So like the small little details. And if people are so focused on just the overall numbers of the macros, those things, those important freaking parts of your diet and your nutrition, they go, you know, completely ignored. And so like what does a lack of fiber, what does a lack of other micronutrients and vitamins and minerals and all that, what can that do? What can that, in terms of optimal functioning?
So,
I know it's
it,
like a big general umbrella type of
yeah,
question.
sticking to the micronutrients. So, like, if you don't have adequate amounts of certain micronutrients, this is going to result in deficiencies, which can uh, you know ultimately result in acquiring certain disease states and conditions which can be pretty catastrophic. But even just in general, having an inadequate consumption of these things can basically impact your ability to recover and perform optimally. um, I think a really good example is that, for a lot of micronutrients, an inadequate amount of those means a compromised immune system. Your immune system isn't functioning at 100%. And sometimes the best ability is availability. If you're getting sick frequently throughout the year as an athlete, because you don't consume a diet which meets all of your micronutrient requirements, that can affect your ability to progress in the off season because you have less training sessions. It can just remove you from games during the season, which is never a good thing. Um, yeah, ultimately, not having enough of the right vitamins and minerals in your diet is going to uh, basically take away from your ability to perform and recover.
Thank you. So it doesn't just come down to just getting the protein. Yes, obviously important. Don't get
Hmm.
me wrong. That's key. But like it's important to eat the veggies. That's what I'm getting at. It's important to get fruits and veggies. Stop not eating those things. I know there's a couple of guys that I sent you that like never had fruits and vegetables, which is absurd. And I don't know how that happens. But God, but like let's eat the veggies, you know? That's my PSA for the day.
Yeah, it kind of get like it's something that drives me nuts, right? As like a nutrition professional, a
Right.
future nutrition professional. Um, People just, they refuse to eat fruits and vegetables.
It's crazy. I love.
And something I equate this to is being an adult, right? So as a
I'm not
functioning
good at
member,
that though.
as an
I'm not
adult,
good.
as a functioning member of society, there are things we have to do. There are certain expectations of us that we have to fulfill on a daily basis. And a lot of our life revolves around things that we may not love doing, but we need to do. Some perfect examples: going to work. For a lot of athletes, going to practice a lot of the
For
time
sure.
isn't something they love, but they love competition and they put in the work ultimately to the part they enjoy. So you might not love going to work every day, but you do it because maybe you have a family and you need to provide. You need your own source of income to pay bills. Same thing with school. A lot of guys hate school, but you need an education in order to have a good future. You do these things because they ultimately are beneficial to you and promote the best outcomes long term. So does eating your fruits and vegetables. I'm not telling you that you have to hate your diet and consume 8 servings of fruits and vegetables today, and it has to be kale
Yeah.
at 4 of those 8 meals, but you don't need to love everything you eat either. And at the end of the day, I think a lot of people just need to suck it up and eat their fruits and vegetables and understand that, hey, this is going to positively impact my health. And, and that's worthwhile to me. So I'm going to make the adult decision to eat some of these things, because it's going to benefit me long term. And then also your taste buds do change,
Right.
you
I was
know?
just gonna say they grow. It's an acquired taste for some things. So
You
if you
you
weren't exposed to it as a kid,
mhm.
doesn't mean that you're not gonna like it. You know what I'm saying? So like give it a shot, force yourself to eat it a little bit, and you might grow to like it.
But yeah, it's also that, right? So you might like something that you just never tried or weren't exposed to, but then also you adapt to flavor preferences over time. So
For
like
sure.
if you eat like the standard American diet, the sad diet, which is absolute crap, and you're eating a whole bunch of processed, hyper palatable food on a daily basis,
Mm,
yes, obviously vegetables are going to taste like crap, but as you consistently eat vegetables a bit more, your taste buds are going to change. You're going to adapt. You're not going to have such proclivity for like these super sweet flavors all of
right.
the time. And will does that mean you're going to end up loving vegetables one day? No, but you'll probably become neutral to them.
You have a stomach.
And neutral's not bad. It's
Right.
fine. You just put that alongside some food you like some more. Um, but yeah, it's just kind of do it as an adult, eat your vegetables, man.
Yeah, do shit you don't like, man. It's gonna like that's gonna make you a better person. In all honesty, just suck it up. But also like, and people will try to cover up these deficiencies, these like not eating fruits and vegetables by just supplementing.
Mhm.
And like I get the idea behind it and the thought process is there, but it's not the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole nother topic, but there's these, beneficial compounds inherent to food, like when, you look at things like polyphenols and different polyphenols in these plant chemicals, which are found in different plants, and these it varies kind of based on like the color of the plant,
Right.
right? So like you have like anthocyanins, for example, which you are plant chemicals that are primarily found in like your red, bluish, and purple fruits and vegetables. And then you have other ones based on different colors. But you can't get these things through supplements.
Right.
And these are things which are consistently associated with improved health outcomes and longevity, and again, which likely means that they have a positive impact on your recovery as an athlete, which can ultimately improve your performance on a consistent basis. So, yeah, there are definitely some beneficial things in whole foods that you might cover deficiencies through supplementation, right? So you might not have like a compromised immune system. You
Right.
might not get scurvy because you haven't been eating enough vitamin C. You cover all of those things, and that's all well and fine, but you're not getting these potentially additive benefits
Right.
which are found in whole foods.
Absolutely. So to wrap it up, kids, put vegetables on your plate, yellow, green, red, all the
Mix it up.
colors. Get like a colorful plate. Get
Eat
some,
a rainbow. That's what I
eat a
encourage. I
rainbow,
want you to eat a rainbow.
whatever. Yeah, dude. And then not Skittles, but like, and then get like and some fruits on there. Eat it. You know, one of my favorite snacks. I've been crushing apple and peanut butter. It's just delicious, dude. Find ways to eat things that you don't want to eat.
Make
You know,
smoothies.
yeah, smoothies is a great one, man. And I can tell you, like when I go through my smoothie thing, I'm throwing stuff I would not eat ever in there. Like kale is disgusting, but I'm gonna throw kale in there. It's good. It's good for you.
And
You
you
don't
can't
taste it.
taste it. You
Like,
can't
and
taste
that's the
it.
thing. So like I'll make green smoothies where I'm throwing all these fun berries and flavors and stuff. I'm throwing Greek yogurt in there. I'm throwing
Mhm.
all types of good fruit, sweet fruit, and I'm throwing spinach and wheatgrass and kale, and it might look green, but you can't taste it. You
Yep.
know what I mean? So like there's ways to hide it and maybe like not even taste it and find a flavor that you do like. And there's ways to get it in your diet. And you gotta eat vegetables, you gotta eat fruit. It's just like you have to. It's like the basics of eating. There's benefits to that stuff, ladies and gents. Jeez, Michael.
Embrace the hard stuff. Embrace
Yeah,
the
that's
stuff
what
you
I'm
don't
saying.
necessarily want to do, but you
It
know it'll
makes you
have positive
it
outcomes.
makes you come out way better at the end. You're way more resilient in the end. Good Lord. Michael, thank you for devoting an hour of your time to me today. We're gonna come back at some point later this week. I know we're gonna have to look at our busy schedules with the quarantine going on. I know that we're stocked up right now, but we're gonna come back and we're gonna tackle the last half of these questions, if that's cool with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for
All
having
right,
me, man.
Michael.
It's been a pleasure.
All right, as always, I appreciate you. Stay safe, Mike.
Later, bro.